Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're all having a good day. In today's episode, we're going to start on the project area over here, but we're going to start with a little terraforming because while I love this area, while I think it's going to be a fantastic area to build our city project, loads of character in the terrain around here, especially the mountains and the cherry groves and everything that lies beyond, it needs a little bit of tidying up. Naturally, Minecraft's landscape is going to be full of these blocky areas, these kind of hills that lead up in ones and twos of blocks so that you can kind of climb them easily as a player, but from the side, it doesn't look all that cool. It doesn't look all that picturesque. It doesn't exactly look super inspiring, and it can be quite difficult to build in as well. Let's say you want to build a house in a spot like this, you want to build some sort of city building, having this giant dirt mound in the middle of it, when you're up close especially, doesn't feel all that great to work with. And so, a lot of the time you'll find players taking down terrain features in order to flatten out the landscape and create a better canvas for building. What we are not going to do, and I will stress this now, is flatten the entire area, because that is something that you see city builders do quite frequently if they just want a flat area to build in. And sometimes I think it feels a little unnatural, especially when we're setting it inside of such a beautiful natural landscape. And cities in real life are rarely built in incredibly flat areas. Sure, there are, valleys and deserts where people will build larger settlements, but typically you'll find that people work with the natural landscape of an area and build on hills, and that creates a lot more character and creates a lot more opportunity for us to do interesting stuff with the builds here in Minecraft. Instead of treating this landscape like something we need to flatten out and completely strip of its character, we're going to be treating it a little bit like we're working with clay. We'll mold the landscape, and anything we carve away will probably be put back in a different place. But I want to create a few areas that are going to shape the city that we're going to be building here. They are going to shape the settlement somewhat. And the idea is that when we look down at this, we end up with something that feels more inspiring, not less, but also feels a bit more like a blank canvas that we can project whatever we want to on. I'm going to take a screenshot from up here behind the portal so we can do a bit of a before and after, and then we're going to get to work, starting with little areas like this. From up there, I can see that this is basically just a mound of dirt, and I think we're going to take this down. We'll take it down from the top down so that we don't have to worry too much about switching tools as we go and dealing with the stone that's probably underneath here. And since we still have a bunch of wood that we used to slab and button the nether tunnel there, I'm going to set up a bunch of chests, one of which I'm going to dump all of the stuff from the nether tunnel in, and the others I'm going to start storing all of this dirt and grass that we're picking up so that we can use that later. Eventually, of course, we are going to run into some naturally generated stone underneath here, and if it's just a few blocks like this, we can probably dig this up without a beacon, but if you start encountering large patches of stone, naturally bring a haste 2 beacon, an efficiency 5 pickaxe, and you'll have a much better time clearing all of this stuff out. So now we've removed that little hillside, that area is looking a little bit flatter, but there's still contours of the terrain around it. While the curves of Minecraft's terrain are easily traversable by the player, because it's possible for the player to simply leap up a full 1 meter block every time you're running around, it's not really feasible to do that in real life. People don't typically spend their time jumping up meter-high walls as they go about their day. So we're going to try and curve the terrain a little bit more naturally so that these rises of a meter only happen every 5 or 6 blocks or so, and that will create a much more natural curve to the terrain. So this is where that push and pull of working with the terrain like clay comes in, because you can subtract from the terrain around here, you can remove blocks in order to create those curves and create that distance between one jump up and the next, but you can also add to it in areas like this to make the terrain feel a little more natural and to create a bit more space out into this flat area that we've got here. We're going to remove the peaks of these hills, we're going to remove the top parts just to flatten it out a little bit more and keep the curve feeling natural. And we're not going to aim to remove all of the grass and flowers from this area, but removing those is going to help us see the contours of the terrain and see where changes need to be made. Now, as I look around here, I'm also looking for stuff that can turn into the opposite kind of feature. Instead of turning it into a rolling hill, material, we're going to exaggerate the vertical distance between the ground and an upper level. So this little section over here that is sticking out in a circular fashion, I think we're going to turn into more like a platform up there that is raised up, and players would have to find their way up there through a different path. I'm going to build up a little bit of the dirt and grass that we've gathered so far around the base of this. First of all, making sure that there's at least a 2-high wall here so that it's not possible for a player to jump up here in the first place, and then adding a stone formation that's going to push upwards from the dirt as though it's been pushed up here by simple geological formation, and the dirt that was surrounding it has fallen away to expose the stone beneath. And naturally at this stage in the process we haven't got a ton of stone from what we've just dug out of the surrounding landscape, so I've returned to my storage room to pick up some more. We're not going to worry about texturing any of this yet either, we're simply going to block out the basic shapes and see what that looks like and how we can improve it going forward. I personally find that I have a much easier time building natural looking stone shapes if I treat this as chunks of rock as opposed to individual blocks. So whenever I put down some stone, I'm always putting down 4 or 5 or 6 blocks of stone at a time, typically building with them in sections like this and overlapping them, and not minding too much if one of the blocks gets obscured behind that because stone is so easy to gather. Once we've got a shape like this going, we're going to look at how it connects to the terrain nearby. We don't want to build this much higher than the hill behind that, so getting up to the top of our stone shape here, I'm going to eyeball it and say this should probably connect to the hillside over here. So I'll build another set of stone shapes that's going to go roughly in that direction, and we're going to cut off the ground down here from really being able to come up and access this. We could build a staircase up later though, or some sort of man-made thing, but thinking purely about the terrain here, this feels like an area that we want to access from the hill and come out onto this platform instead of climb up to from ground level down here. And having worked through the rain, we're starting to see how that's affecting the shape of the area. We've got a whole wall built up here. It's hollow on the inside and doesn't have a second section connecting it to the hillside behind, but we're starting to shape the natural landscape in ways that are going to be really impactful to how we structure this area and how we choose to build a city around it. Think of terraforming as a way of priming the canvas for all of the detail you're going to paint onto this later with structures, but for now it's important to get these terrain features in place because those are going to inform what we do with the city buildings. If we just start with something flat, we have to build all of this stuff up from scratch to make the city feel at all realistic. And like the people here have adapted to the natural features of the terrain instead of completely bulldozing it. I suppose that also depends on the theme that you're working with, because bulldozing an area might make a lot more sense if you're building a very modern city, one where they have access to technology that can move this amount of dirt around. But in the case of this city, we're going with a more dynamic, steampunky fantasy feel, which is going to mean probably not so many earth movers and a little bit more adherence to the natural terrain. Honestly though, building stuff like this is my comfort zone in Minecraft. I find this really relaxing to just work on the terrain and have a long-term build project goal in mind. So I'm going to step away, do a little bit more of this stuff between clips, and when we come back, we'll see how much of an impact I've managed to make on the terrain around here. And after a while, our landscape, which initially looked like this, now looks like this. I tried my best to line this up as closely as possible with the original screenshot. I didn't take like coordinates or anything for where I was standing, but we have made some pretty significant changes. We're obviously not done by any stretch. There is still a lot left to do, but you can see that the landscape has started to smooth out in some areas, and I've added a lot of structural elements to it. Very basic ones so far. Obviously over here we just have some large stone walls, and over there in the distance I've started to shape out that as well. This section here is the one I've done the most terraforming to, but it's really just a collection of blocks designed to act as an example for what I would like to do with the rest of this. And obviously we're going to add a lot of different elements to this as we go. We're going to change up the texture of some of this stuff so it isn't such a plain palette, so it's not just grey, brown, and green. We might add little sections of different stone types into this. I brought some andesite with me in a shulker box so that we could maybe do a little bit of texturing in a subtle way, just to make it look like there's some natural geology going on without making it feel like a patchwork of different stuff. And I'm starting to shape out some more of the flatter terrain around here. It is slower going, but I am determined to make it work. I've stopped at this stage because I wanted to bring up a couple of things. First of all, Even though I'd explored this area a little bit before we started going, I had no idea there was a ruined nether portal over here, and so I thought I'd acknowledge this before I just took it down. Looks like in the chest we just got a regular golden apple, some iron nuggets, and a curse of vanishing chest plate. I'm probably just going to throw that into lava, to be honest with you, but the rest of this stuff, who knows, we might end up using it. Either way, we're going to get rid of all of the lava and just take down all the netherrack and the obsidian and everything else, but I just thought it was worth pointing out that as you explore and as you start to terraform a little bit, you might find some interesting landmarks buried beneath the surface. And I know a couple of people in my community who have dug all the way down to bedrock for a perimeter project, and weirdly enough found that there was a desert temple generating at the level of ancient cities, thanks to some weird quirks of structure generation. Over here on this side, I'm actually quite interested to remove more of this terrain to expose some of the cherry trees that are growing here, which of course we can move around, but I'm also trying to work with the natural terrain as much as possible here, so we have less work to do in terms of the overall terraforming. And naturally, we've got some flat stone walls up here, there's some natural formations of snow on them, and the cherry trees frame that out nicely. I'd like to get rid of some of the taller peaks in the terrain here and there, so that you can see that row of cherry trees that's growing up there on the mountain, and the same goes on this side. We're framing it out with the stony features of this little wall of terrain here. Naturally, right now, the only bit that you can really walk on top of is over here, where I've done a mix of grass, stone, and moss for the top of this, but we're probably going to end up building something more structural out here on the end of this little peninsula of terrain. Maybe we'll even put in something that feels a bit more like a lighthouse, even though this area is surrounded by land. I mean, if we wanted to tie this area together with our spawn build, then maybe this is the place from which the floating island airship originates. Maybe it took off from around here and gathered a bit of the landscape as it went, but then ended up closer to my starter area. I feel like that could be a fun way of tying the two areas together a little bit more. At each point in this process, whenever I put in a new landmark like this, whenever I've shaped the terrain up into these walls of stone, some of which are a bit more detailed than others, but we'll work on that a little later, I always come back to the same vantage point. The area from which we're going to be entering the city will be over here, since we're going to be coming through the nether portal most likely most often, and so I always want to look at what it's going to look like from this angle, controlling the shapes and the sight lines, what you're going to be able to see from this entry point, what is going to be hidden from you that will be revealed as you explore. And so naturally, from over here, you don't see the fact that over there in that little patch of terrain, it looks quite flat from where we're standing right now, but there are actually some natural gullies that are kind of interesting and could potentially be worth working with. There is a hole in the wall here where I've erected this stone wall above it, but there is a natural cave that goes into the earth and comes out somewhere else. There's a few areas where the ground is kind of patchy, and if you walk down into this, you find little routes through to other sections. And I'm wondering if maybe we turn this into something that's a feature of the eventual city we build here. Maybe we keep this as part of the terrain and maybe codify that, maybe make that into something more structural, maybe turn it into a subway system or something. There are a few different options for either pedestrian travel or minecart transport or anything like that that we could potentially work in from the natural landscape. So if you want another lesson to take away from this video, aside from adding stuff like this to a landscape to give it a bit more structure, is to let the landscape inform what you're doing so that you don't have to do as much work. I want this to be a more approachable... Oh, the horses are following me around because I've got golden carrots. Speaking of approaching things, I want this to be a more approachable guide to terraforming, something where you don't have to completely flatten out the entire landscape in order to build it up from scratch the way you want it to, or that you have to build over the entire landscape. Like, some people prefer to just let the landscape below it be and shape it into a larger hill over the top of all of this, but that often ends up being a tremendous amount of work and fairly tedious work when it comes to just placing dirt over and over again. We are going to have to do a little bit of that here and there so that we can connect these stone walls to the grassy plateaus that we have around here, and I've purposefully left a bit more of a curved edge to some of these so that they feel a little bit larger, so we can build some stuff on these potentially, but naturally that means they get taken away from the edges of where Minecraft generates these more angular shapes, stuff that doesn't feel as much like natural terrain in the real world. But it's really up to you whether you fill all of this stuff in with dirt, or perhaps more likely put a few torches down there and cover it over with a couple of layers of dirt so that you at least have a top layer that you can remove to retexture things if you want to change that out for mud paths or, you know, coarse dirt or roads made out of stone bricks or other materials. It's even a good idea to leave a double layer of blocks like this so that you could put stuff like gravel or concrete powder, anything that has gravity attached to it. Having a second layer of dirt underneath the first is going to support blocks like that might potentially fall through otherwise. But I'm going to continue working on this. We're going to take down the nether portal, we're going to flatten out some of the terrain up here, and the view from over by that portal is going to look a little bit different next time we see it. And now for our last progress update of the video. We've gone from this all the way to this. And there are cows in the way of my view a little bit, but I'm really happy with how things have come together here. This is, of course, not going to be changing too much about the landscape quite yet because we haven't started building anything. And these natural changes are really the first step in the evolution of this space. So it may not feel like we've done a whole lot, but trust me, this has taken weeks of work at this stage, which is why you haven't had a survival guide episode for a little while, and I'm sorry about that. But I've started laying out where the monorail is going to go that takes us out from the nether portal, and honestly, you build up speed pretty quickly once you come through this portal on a boat and travel out on the other side. As long as you're holding down forward, you keep going even if you don't retain the same level of momentum. So I want to hop down here and give you a quick tour. I've done most of the work just based on the view that I get from the top of that hill above where the nether portal is, where I took that initial screenshot. But so from down here, you can see that I've also laid in a stone cliff right here, once again, still using just the stone block, not really adding any texture or anything quite yet. We'll be doing that as we go, really. But up here, we'll have an elevated monorail track that's going to lead around other parts of the city. Might have a station here to disguise the fact that there's a nether portal there, and then maybe add another station slightly closer to the mountain over on that side so you can skip over to the other half of town. Down here, there's going to be plenty of buildings, a kind of bustling city street environment, but we're going to be using these outcroppings of stone as ways to elevate certain buildings above the rest of them without having to build a building with a massive foundation or a weirdly kind of extended structure. We don't want anything to look too out of place or like it's been built just to be tall. We want it to still feel fairly natural. Around here on this side, between these two cliffs, I've left this slope here relatively untouched. It's still part of the natural Minecraft terrain because I'm still not quite certain what I want to do with this, but stretching it out that way didn't quite feel like it made sense. I've flattened out some of the ground down there, but anywhere you see grass or flowers still growing is an area that I haven't really gotten around to terraforming yet. But this part up here, this plateau, has been flattened out. There was a bunch of stone here that we removed with the beacon, and I just replaced the surface here with grass to make it easier to build on, to make it easier for me to see this as a plains biome, as sort of a blank canvas. You can see a bit more of the cherry grove over here, but only a little bit, because there was still a really compelling set of cave systems around here that I think I want to take advantage of. There's one down here as well. There's a sort of passage down there that's going to be really interesting to see if we can incorporate that into the city. I'm trying to take as much inspiration from the natural landscape as I can whilst making it fit to build on at the same time. And over here, there's a cliff wall along the back here. I didn't want to make too many of those cliffs higher up the mountains because that doesn't necessarily feel like natural mountainous terrain, which I think Minecraft does a really good job of generating once you get higher up like that. And I doubt we'll do a great deal of building on the mountaintop anyway. Those are going to stay as scenery, and so I think it makes sense for them to have a lot of the ice and snow and exposed stone like that without making too many of these things into flattened cliffs. I've also ended this section of cliff around there because, once again, I'm not sure quite how I want to connect it over here. If I want there to be another way for people to get up into the upper level of the city from down here at ground level, if we're going to have a big staircase here or some sort of elevator or something. There's also a little passage down this way where this water is flowing that I haven't touched quite yet because we could do something interesting there as well. Over on this side, once again, I have left this cave here with a stone wall supporting it. You can see some Endermen have been at work down there, moving moving some of the grass blocks around, but there are a few other spots where that cave could come out, so I'm kind of interested to see what we can do with that sort of subway system or an undercity down there. And moving up here onto this cliff top, you'll notice that what I've done basically everywhere is push the grass out to the edge of these stone walls, leaving it fairly untextured for now, and it looks very unfinished, but we just have this grey border around everything that decides exactly where the cliff is going to be. And I think we'll take out all of these peonies, maybe flatten the ground up here, and consider what we can build here as well. Now, I imagine a lot of the buildings that I want to do potentially stretching out into the surrounding biomes. I want to take advantage of the fact that we have a beautiful cherry grove over there, so maybe there'll be a valley of buildings leading down towards that. And up here, of course, is where I wanted to build something that feels a bit like a castle, and we have some experiments with pillagers that we can do thanks to the fact that a naturally generated pillager outpost is here. But this I have left untouched for the moment because you got to pace yourself, really. You got to take things one step at a time, and I'm really happy from multiple angles at looking at this area and thinking, yeah, there's really some structure to that now, and I can make a start on building some stuff around here. Over here, I've left things untouched because most of this meadow is relatively flat. There's a couple of hillsides and stuff that we could take down, or if we're building a castle here, we could actually use those as sections for raised watchtowers and where the battlements would be extra reinforced. Likewise, I haven't done a whole lot to the village that's down there. You can see that the denizens of the village are still alive, despite it being nighttime here several times. I don't think they've been attacked by zombies or anything, and some of them are just struggling to get out of the water over there. But we'll do something with the village, whether it's just trading or whether it's incorporating it into the build project here in general. And of course, as I explain all of this stuff, it starts raining. Well, that's happened a few times since we've been over here, and I've kind of gotten used to it at this point, but I think we could probably do with building a few things around here just to make sure we have some shelter from the rain and make sure that this build project really starts off on the right foot. So for today, from the terraforming portion of this, that's where we're going to leave it for this week's episode. Folks, thank you so much for watching the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you've enjoyed this. We'll be back soon with a bunch more technical stuff, a bunch more building, and maybe a little bit more terraforming as well. But hopefully this has been a fun introduction to terraforming on a much larger scale for you. Thank you so much for watching. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care. Bye for now.